Snow blanketed the mountains in a serene white, but inside the cabin the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Alex sat stiffly at the dinner table, his chair a little too small and the air too warm from the roaring fire. The tension had been brewing all week. His father, stoic and silent for most of the evening, finally broke his silence. "So, Alex, what's the plan? Still bouncing around from one thing to another?" Alex's stomach tightened. "I'm not bouncing around. I'm building something. It just takes time." His mother chimed in, her voice as sharp as her perfectly arranged silverware. "Honey, we just want to see you settled. You're 27 now. Mark's got his career lined up, a house, a wife. You?" "I don't want to be Mark," Alex snapped, his voice rising. His brother smirked across the table, swirling wine in his glass. "Don't drag me into this," Mark said coolly. "Not my fault you can't figure out what you're doing with your life." "Yeah, sure, Mark," Alex shot back. "Because working yourself to death at Dad's company is the pinnacle of success, right? Congrats on being the golden child." "Enough," their father's fist hit the table, rattling the plates. "This isn't about Mark, it's about you. You've been drifting for years, and we're tired of making excuses for you." Alex felt his face flush with heat. "You don't know anything about what I'm trying to do," he said, his voice shaking. "You just want me to fit into your neat little box. Well, guess what? I'm not doing it." "Oh, don't be dramatic," his mother said, reaching for her wine glass. "We're just saying you need to grow up." "Grow up?" Alex stood, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I'm doing just fine on my own. Sorry I'm not living your perfect little plan." "Alex, please," his mother began, but he was already grabbing his coat. "I need air," he muttered, avoiding his father's glare. "Yeah, go ahead," Mark called after him, his tone mocking. "Run away like always." Alex turned to respond but stopped himself, shaking his head in frustration. He slammed the door behind him, the cold air a slap to his heated face. He stomped across the porch to his car. His breath puffed in visible clouds, but the sting of the argument burned hotter in his chest. He yanked the car door open and dropped into the driver's seat, slamming it shut harder than he needed to. For a moment, he sat there, gripping the steering wheel, replaying the argument in his head, the smug look on Mark's face, his father's disappointment, his mother's backhanded concern. "Grow up," he muttered bitterly, his voice echoing in the small cabin of the car. Maybe they should try actually listening for once. He twisted the key, and the engine sputtered to life. The tires crunched over the snow as he backed out of the driveway. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay. The empty bottle of wine at dinner weighed on him, but he'd only had a couple of glasses. He told himself he was fine. The radio played a soft instrumental of Silent Night, and he turned it off with a sharp jab. The last thing he wanted was holiday cheer right now. The narrow mountain road stretched ahead of him, lined by towering pines that swayed gently in the wind. Snowflakes swirled in his headlights, hypnotic and endless. He turned up the heat, but his hands still felt cold on the wheel. It wasn't until he reached a sharp bend that he noticed it. Out of the corner of his eye, something moved among the trees, a dark, impossibly tall figure. He glanced quickly to the side, but there was nothing. Just the shadows of the forest playing tricks on him. He exhaled a shaky breath, forcing himself to focus on the road. But the sense of unease wouldn't let go. Then it appeared again. This time, it was directly in front of him, standing in the middle of the road. A towering silhouette, impossibly long arms hanging at its sides, its head tilted slightly as if studying him. Alex's heart leapt into his throat. He slammed on the brakes, but the car skidded on the icy road, spinning out of control. He tried to correct the wheel, but it was too late. The car slid sideways, plowing into a snowbank with a heavy thud. For a moment, everything was still. The engine sputtered before dying, and silence wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket. His breath fogged the windshield as he sat frozen, gripping the wheel, his pulse hammering in his ears. He glanced into the rearview mirror, hoping, praying that whatever he'd seen was gone. But it wasn't. The figure stood just a few feet behind the car now, its head still tilted, its form unnaturally still. It was so close he could make out the faint shimmer of its shadowy edges, as if it wasn't entirely solid. Alex's fingers fumbled for the door handle, his instinct screaming at him to run. He threw the door open and stumbled out into the snow, his breath coming in sharp gasps. "Who's there?" he called, his voice cracking. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond, it didn't move, but the air around him grew colder, a biting chill that seemed to sink into his bones. Alex turned and ran. The snow crunched loudly under his boots as he sprinted toward the trees, his mind racing with fear and confusion. He didn't dare look back. He didn't want to know how close it was. The shadows of the forest swallowed him whole as he plunged deeper into the woods, his only goal to get as far away as possible. But even as he ran, he could feel it, something watching him, following him, its presence as heavy and suffocating as the argument he'd left behind. And then the sound came, a low, guttural hum that resonated in the air, vibrating through his chest. It was close. Too close. Alex stumbled to a halt, his legs trembling. He turned slowly, his breath visible in the icy air. The figure was there, just beyond the tree line. But this time, it moved. It stepped forward, and Alex realized with a sinking horror that it wasn't walking. It was gliding, its movements smooth and unnatural. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Alex's mind screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to move. The figure glided closer, its presence swallowing the night. It loomed impossibly tall, its shadowy form bending the dim light of the moon around it. Finally, instinct took over. Alex turned and bolted deeper into the forest, dodging low-hanging branches and stumbling over roots hidden beneath the snow. His heart thundered in his chest, the sound nearly drowning out the low hum that seemed to follow him. He didn't dare look back. The cold gnawed at his face, his lungs burning with every frantic breath. The snow grew deeper as he ran, his boots sinking further with each step, slowing him down. But he couldn't stop, not when he could feel it closing in. Ahead, the trees began to thin, revealing a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. Alex stumbled into the open space, gasping for air. He spun around, scanning the edge of the woods for any sign of the figure. At first, there was nothing but the soft whisper of the wind. Then the hum started again. Low and resonant, it vibrated through the air, making Alex's teeth ache. His head swiveled frantically, searching for the source. The figure emerged from the trees, its body blending into the shadows like smoke. But now Alex could see it more clearly. Its form seemed to shift and ripple, never fully solid. Its face, or what should have been its face, was a blank void, an absence of features that somehow felt more terrifying than any monstrous visage. "Stay away!" Alex shouted, his voice cracking. He bent down and grabbed a chunk of ice, hurling it toward the figure. The projectile sailed through its body, disappearing into the swirling darkness as if it had never existed. The figure stopped at the edge of the clearing, tilting its head again, as if curious. Alex's legs trembled, and he stumbled backward until his shoulders hit a tree. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as the hum grew louder, vibrating in his skull. "What do you want?" he shouted again, his voice desperate and hoarse. For a moment there was silence. Then the figure raised one long, shadowy arm and pointed. Alex followed the gesture, his gaze shifting toward the woods behind him. There, barely visible through the trees, was his car, still half buried in the snowbank. The hum changed, taking on a deeper, almost mournful tone. Alex's chest tightened as he realized what it was doing. It wasn't chasing him, it was hurting him. "No," Alex muttered, shaking his head. "I'm not going back there." But the figure didn't move. It simply stood, its arm outstretched, as if daring him to disobey. Alex clenched his fists, his mind racing. He could try to make a break for the woods again, but he'd seen how fast it could move. He had no weapon, no plan, and no way to outrun it. Taking a shuddering breath, he turned toward the direction it was pointing. His boots crunched over the snow as he retraced his steps, his body trembling with fear and cold. When he reached the edge of the clearing, he glanced over his shoulder. The figure hadn't moved, but its presence was still palpable, pressing against him like a weight. As Alex neared his car, the hum began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. His breath puffed in clouds as he approached the driver's side door, the shattered glass glinting in the moonlight. He hesitated, peering through the window. Everything seemed normal, no sign of the figure, no movement in the shadows. Slowly, he reached for the door handle and pulled. The interior light flickered on, casting long shadows across the snow. Alex slid into the driver's seat, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the keys. The engine sputtered, but didn't start. Come on, he whispered, twisting the key again. The engine roared to life, trembling with fear and cold. When he reached the edge of the clearing, he glanced over his shoulder. The figure hadn't moved, but its presence was still palpable, pressing against him like a weight. As Alex neared his car, the hum began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. His breath puffed in clouds as he approached the driver's side door, the shattered glass glinting in the moonlight. He hesitated, peering through the window. Everything seemed normal, no sign of the figure, no movement in the shadows. Slowly, he reached for the door handle and pulled. The interior light flickered on, casting long shadows across the snow. Alex slid into the driver's seat, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the keys. The engine sputtered, but didn't start. Come on, he whispered, twisting the key again. The engine roared to life, and relief washed over him, until he looked up. The figure was standing in front of the car, its head tilted in that same unnatural way. Alex screamed, slamming the car into reverse. The tires spun on the ice before catching, sending the car lurching backward. He twisted the wheel, trying to maneuver around the figure, but it was already gone. The hum returned, louder than ever, as the headlights caught movement to his right. The figure was there, gliding alongside the car, its featureless face turned toward him. Alex's panic reached a fever pitch as he floored the gas. The car skidded onto the main road, its tires barely gripping the icy surface. The hum seemed to follow him, echoing through the forest as he sped away. It wasn't until he saw the lights of the nearest town in the distance that the hum finally stopped. But the figure wasn't gone. In the rearview mirror, Alex could still see its outline, standing at the edge of the woods, watching. And somehow he knew it wasn't the last time he'd see it.